four-star General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, great to see you. Thank you for being here. The world is, of course, inspired by the courage. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to stand up to the Iranian regime. They do not hesitate in giving punishment to those who protest against the regime so publicly, and everybody knows who they were. But what will it do? Will there be any reaction from Iran to what this team did?
Well, nothing will happen until they get home, but it's likely something will happen to them for sure. And that kind of a public display is an embarrassment to the regime. Look at the Olympics. Emotions run high. Athletes come to the Olympics, certainly. They've been working for years to reach that pinnacle. And at times, political statements are made, given what's happening in their country or other people's countries. And we've seen this play out. I certainly admire the guts of that team to do that, knowing what's happening at home. And we're over 2 months now with the people in the streets really demonstrating against the regime because they want human dignity and personal freedoms and yearning for democracy. And they're willing to risk their lives to do it. Thousands have been killed, and tens of thousands are now in jail as a result of it. And the protests are still going on. And the fact that these athletes did that on a world stage is certainly commendable to them.
Sure is. But, you know, the arrests continue. As you mentioned, many, many people have been killed. But they just arrested the niece of the so-called supreme leader of the country, a woman who has called her uncle's regime, quote, a murderous and child-killing regime. I mean, this is getting close to civil war here when you have families separated like this.
Yeah, certainly that's very significant, but it also reflects how serious this protest is. There's not been anything quite like this in the 41-year history of the regime. I'm disappointed that the United States hasn't taken a more aggressive role in speaking out. Listen, the protesters, they don't want us there. They don't want our guns. They want our voice. And we should be providing that voice, and we should be organizing the world who cares about democracy and personal freedoms to do the same. We said a couple things, but it should be continuous and strong and make certain that they understand that we're behind them. It can make a difference, as Reagan demonstrated when he spoke on behalf of the Polish protest against the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and yet I remember during the beginning of the Obama administration, we saw these incredible protests in Iran, virtually not a peep from President Obama. So there's bad precedents for what happens with the Democratic administration on this. But does it nevertheless distract the Iranians from their pursuit of nuclear weapons?
Well, they're on message to do that. It's a reality that we're facing. I think we're getting closer to a potential conflict here, because certainly the Israelis are not going to let that happen unless the Iranians just come to grips with the reality that they don't want that conflict, and they're going to stand down from doing it. But I don't have much hope for that. I think this regime is about nuclear weapons to preserve the regime and use it as blackmail against their neighbors in the Middle East, and they are about domination and control of the Middle East. They've said that every year for 41 years, and they mean it. And let's take them at face value.
Let's turn to another nuclear problem that we have in the form of China and the protests that are happening there. Do you think the protests there, is it kind of similar to Iran, that they are very brave and we appreciate what they're doing, but they won't manage to change a regime?
Well, we don't know what this could lead to. We haven't seen anything on a scale like this since Tiananmen Square, and in some respects, it's quite different because it's more widespread. And they're actually protesting under a regime since Tiananmen Square that controls and the grips of life in all aspects inside of China. They have wiped out completely civil society, and now they have a high-tech surveillance state. And the people know that. They know that facial recognition is just a part of everyday life in China, but they're still on the street.
It's amazing.
That is amazing, the courage that has taken place in doing that. And you know full well, they're arresting the leaders, they're arresting people. The Chinese are weighing and trying to find a balance here. Will this thing evaporate, or will they have to go in there with force to crush it? you know they will not let this continue to the point where it becomes any threat to the regime whatsoever. And that's the reality of what we're facing. But once again, where is our voice on this? This is what we've always been looking for. You know, it's a fact, and Chinese have admitted this when you talk to them. They fear their own people protesting against them and overthrowing the regime more than any adversary, to include the United States.
Wow.
It has always been their Achilles heel. So when you have them on the street here doing this, we and the world should be supporting them.
Hey, very quickly, we got to run, but it's about China, but what's happening in the U.S., the new leader of Congress, Kevin McCarthy, is about to become Speaker. He says he's going to remove Eric Swalwell, the Democratic congressman, from the House Intel Committee because of a relationship he had with a woman who was probably a Chinese spy. Do you think that's the right move on McCarthy's part?
Well, I don't believe it's my place to get involved in who should be on what political committees in the Congress. But I've always felt that based on Swalwell's relationship with the Chinese spy for 3 years, and the fact that nothing seemed to be done about that was very concerning to us. And when the FBI said, well, they didn't think there was any wrongdoing here, I would normally take that at face value from the FBI because I've always respected them and still do. But the leadership of the FBI, we have a healthy dose of skepticism now, David, about them and how political they've become. And so I don't know all the facts. McCarthy has had classified briefings that we have not had on this issue. So I've got to defer to his judgment. He has knowledge that we don't have.
General Jack Keane, good to see you, General. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.